Okay, to start off this scene, I'm going to start off with some glossy paper, quarter-size page, and some reinker fluid, Adirondack Lights Aqua, and I'm going to apply it with a stylus tool. The Aqua inks, or Adirondack Lights inks, are very thick and slippery. Good ones to go with first. Kind of creating some streaks across here. You notice my angle of the paper, keeping my stroke kind of ergonomic. This slides across nicely. I'm not scrubbing. Never scrub with these, I wouldn't say delicate, but these are certainly, still sponge tips here, and if you take that type of material and you start scrubbing across here, you kind of in two directions, especially, it depends on what type of ink you're using. This one's a very slippery one, so it allows me to drag that streak across the entire card there in a very easy fashion. But if you have an ink that's a little bit quicker, drying faster, there's some, the ink is, the moisture is penetrating the surface of the paper faster, and there's just going to be a much higher probability that a tip could tear. Okay, that was the Adirondack Lights Aqua. Now I'm going on with the number 10 Marvy Blue, light blue. But I also wanted to try something. One of the things I wanted to do was just go on straight with the reinkers, because these pads aren't going to be available for much longer. So I was going to use the reinker fluids for them, because the reinker fluids, for some reason, are not being discontinued, but the pads are. This is February of 2014 when I'm shooting this, so at some point in time they will very soon be off the market. Okay, now I was going to use the reinker fluids for those, but I also have these old dye-based inks from my old college days, and they're probably 20 years old, and practically have full bottles of them, so I thought, why don't I try some of these other supplies here, just to see what they look like. These are called Luma dyes, very old label. I would imagine they're still around. This one's a permanent blue, orchid blue. So I can get some different looks out of it, and we'll see how it works in conjunction with the Marvy inks. These are dye-based inks here. The chemistry is going to be different, but we'll see. It's kind of it's a thinner ink, I can tell, just by when I streak this on here like this. It's very dark. Okay. Because it's darker too, I'm kind of having to, I find myself kind of pulling up with my touch or streak. And it's penetrating the page a lot faster, okay? See that right there? It's fairly dry. Well, it's not dry, but it's not spreading as much as the other inks do. I think these inks right here, they don't have to stay suspended in a raised dye-based pad, okay? So they're probably thinner that way than you know, the typical pad inks that have to be a little bit thicker so that, you know, on a raised dye-based pad it just doesn't leak out the side, you know, it stays suspended in the material. That being said, I do like the color. I'm going on with the, I don't know which one I used first, the permanent blue or the ultra blue. But, I don't know, those pads didn't, you know, that color just doesn't exist in my range of pad or pad reinkers, so, you know, what I say is why not try it and check it out, see if it, see how they work, you know. These Luma dye inks are more akin to, well, it says, you know, it's watercolors. They're real similar to this other brand called Dr. Martens as well. Dye-based inks like that have been used by illustrators for a long time for their really bright intensity. Before comic book art went to you know, computer coloring, you know, digital coloring. They used to use Dr. Martens dyes to do their comic books, so you can get very bright tones out of it. Alright. Let's see. Let's try a little bit of this orchid blue. I'm guessing the orchid blue has a little bit of maybe a touch of red in it or something. This one feels a little bit more watery for some reason. It's kind of nice. Let's go with a little bit more. Now, as I'm putting this down, as I'm laying this color down, I do feel like some of the colors underneath it are kind of going back into solution and blending a little bit more, which is fine with me. I think it's kind of getting the background a little bit smoother. Now, one of the things as well, because I've used so much of that, you know, these dyes, Luma inks now, this page is really saturated with moisture now, this cardstock. So, remains to be seen how the images stamp on top of it. I didn't test this out beforehand, so we'll see how it goes. Okay, now I'm going back in with the Marvy blue. And just laying that down on top. Kind of going for the corners, the four corners, to kind of frame off this, what is going to end up being a background. I'm kind of becoming more perimeter oriented with the, you know, this really dark color. And with these dye-based inks, it might be interesting to put some other texture on top, maybe with a spray bottle effect or something like that. Why not do that? Let's try it. Maybe I'll do it where there's sky and water. That's what I'm kind of going for. I'm going for this reflection here. Let's try something here. Okay, let's do it where, kind of the watery section down below has a little bit more texture. I'm going to take this spray ball and just kind of spray it down there. Don't spray too close, otherwise, you know, it won't give you that kind of spray pattern look to it. Alright. Have it down below here. I could have used a little bit of a finer spray, and it's starting to go... Yeah, can you see that? Where I sprayed that there? No, I'll have to wait for that to kind of do its thing and separate those colors. But as far as I can tell, I think I like that texture so far. It's kind of bleaching it out. I'm not sure how I've done it before on you know, kind of the dye-based pad inks before, but I haven't done it over the something like that Luma ink. So I'm going to let that sit here and come back to this in about 5 minutes. Okay, we're back, and I didn't quite wait 5 minutes, but I figured that was good enough. The colors are kind of separated, or not separated, but kind of has that bleached look a little bit. I don't think I ever have done the actual bleach techniques where you put bleach in, or some kind of diluted bleach before, but I imagine I'll have to try that one of these days. Okay, now looking at this, I'm just seeing, it looks like there is a little bit of puddling of some drops on there still, so I'll just take a paper towel and sop up some of that if there is any. Okay. Fairly dark background. If I'm going to stamp something over the top of it, I want to go with something fairly bold. Let's just go with the Lakeside Cove large stamp. Okay, let's see. And I have re-inked my Marvy black. Now, there's going to be this little area of reflected light down here, so what I did was, there's this little dot pattern down here on the stamp. See this right here? What I did was I didn't ink up this area down here, and I want that area to kind of transition, you know, a little bit more softly than it would, perhaps, if I just inked all that up in black. So, blotting off some of this down here. If you want a few streaks and those kind of reflections there, you can do that too. I just kind of took my paper towel and, you know, wiped it that way and that way. Okay. Let's go about right here. Stand up if you need to with large stamps to give there, you know, plenty of pressure in the middle. And I'm stamping on a fairly wet piece of cardstock at this point in time with all those layers of blue. So I keep this down a little bit longer than I normally would, just to let that ink transfer over there. Otherwise, sometimes it works like a vacuum. You're stamping kind of wet into, you know, moist surface, and then you pull it off and it's like a vacuum. It just sucks the ink right off of there. And that, of course, is not something that you want to have happen. Okay. Alright. Good enough. Okay. And let's see. Go with a little bit of closer trees here. Sometimes what I find is when I'm looking at scenes, and I don't know, if someone asks me if you know, I can suggest anything, you know, a critique of their work. a lot of times one of the most basic things is I would recommend just finding sometimes a better black pad. Unless you're going for something fairly soft, I find that having nice, crisp, as close to 100% value blacks really can improve a scene. It's just you're starting off with a value so much higher, and it can put a little bit of a punch and impact. Not that every stamp has to be stamped out in black like I'm doing here. I'm doing it in black because of the darker background, but you can have kind of just this very crisp element and bold and things with impact. Chances are if you're stamping something in black you want it to be dark, so why not take it as dark as you can. I'm using the Marvy black pad. Like I said, those things have been discontinued for now. A lot of people love things like the Memories pad. Some people use watercolor pads. Find one that's going to give you a good, solid impression. Okay. Now this one, before I went into this, as I was taking that little break here, waiting for that texture to kind of reveal itself, what I did is I re-inked my pad. So having a good dark pad and keep it nice and re-inked. Not too juicy because you don't want your real detailed stamps to kind of stamp out blotchy, where the stamp has too much ink on it, but have enough on there for sure. Okay, that's the background there, and well, let's see. We can put in some other textures and effects like that. What I think I want to do though on this one is go into some effective use of shadows, in scenic stamping, and this could be the first scene. What I want to do is I want to come into these areas around on these rocks. The stamps themselves do have shadows rendered into them, okay? But what we want to do is we want to go in here now with the color scheme that we've used. Okay, I didn't really use that one, but these two right here, and go in and add a little bit more value into some of the darker areas of those rocks right back there. It makes the rocks seem like they have more volume, in a two-dimensional space, and it'll help improve the lighting of a scene by creating shadows. So anyways, I can't do that right now because that black is super juicy and it's really wet. I don't know if you can see this right now, but kind of if you hold it up at an angle, you can, I don't know if you can see it on this video, but there's kind of these glistening areas where you can see it kind of puddled up there. So I know that if I go over it with some color, it's just going to drag that black and kind of smear it. So I'm going to have to wait a little bit to be able to do that. So another break in the video right now. Okay. Normally I don't have to take too much of a break, but it was because of these Luma dyes. It really saturated the pulp of the paper. This is dry to the touch right here, but that black really has to kind of dry on the surface because there's nowhere for it to go, because the back, probably the pulp of the paper is super saturated right now, so the way that that's going to have to dry is by evaporation as opposed to being absorbed into the pulp and, for the surface to be, dry enough to, add more color. So, anyway, let's see, I'll probably have to wait a bit of time, 20 minutes probably at last, or at least. Okay. Okay, back after about 20 minutes. The card appears to be dry to the touch. A little bit of residual moisture, but I don't think anything that we can't, nothing that we can't work with. Okay, let's see. I kind of finished off the background with some of the number 3 Marvy blue, but I could stand to be a little bit darker. I feel that the The image is a little bit open right now. I want to contain it more, and bring more of the focus to the inside of the card. So I'm going on the edges right here. I'm trying to go for kind of a rounded look. I don't want to have, you know, like this shape, you know, sticking in from the side. So sometimes it's a matter of tapping and kind of pulling a little bit, streaking. Okay, now like I said, there was a little bit of residual moisture on some of these trees, so I don't want to streak it. If I'm anything, I'm just going to tap on top of it, you know, to prevent kind of a long grayish streak running across there. Okay, but anyways, you can already tell, kind of top corners, you could probably stand to use some of that right here. And when I start getting into some of these rocks, I can kind of start going into some of the shading, right? We can reference the stamp designs, especially if we have it kind of an indexed version of it. If you have a piece of rubber, but you've kind of printed out, you know, something, you can take a look at it and check it out. There, you can see where the shadows are down here. I mean, there's the reflection of the trees, but it also gets a little bit darker. And if you notice on these rocks right here, there's some lighter areas of the rocks. Well, wherever there's kind of some shading, that's the area that I'm going to kind of go into with some darker tones. Now, it just depends how dark your background is. If it's not this dark, if it's kind of more of a pastel background or something like that, then what you want to do is you want to hit the shadows with something more, you know, maybe like one of these two colors right here. Just something light. I mean, I don't know. I guess you can do something with dye-based inks too, or if you have reinkers from other pads, you know, you can use those as well. Just put it on some kind of palette. You know, I just use this little lid here from you know, some kind of takeout food. This is dinner salad. Anyways, ink up, just lay it down like that. You don't want to have a big, long streak of dark colors right there, though, so you kind of have to be careful about that, you know, when you're using more ink, and that's typically what you'd have on here if you used straight reinker fluid, because it's so juicy and you would saturate the sponge. You know, maybe just take a little drop of it and kind of blot it off a little bit so you can have some good control. Okay, now going back into the shading, what I'm doing is I'm not laying this down real fast, as you can see. I'm going to go into this area down here, right along the where the rocks meet water, the surface of the water, and I'm going to go into it, you know, kind of with a nice smooth touch. Let me see if I can get in here a little bit better. Okay, now you notice I can't do it this way. This isn't ergonomic. So what I've done is I've changed the angle, and I can see that space down there, you know, and I'm coming into it with this. I can see that, you know, angle, you know, where that sponge is hitting the paper, okay? So, just going along there, and now my number 3 blue right here is not terribly juicy, so I don't have a ton of ink on it, but see that right there? That shadow, okay? And I'm just gonna blend that out a little bit. Now when I want to come into these rocks, what do? I'm going to change this around this way and come into it a little bit like that and darken the area where rock meets water. Okay. And while I'm doing that, I can kind of give a little bit more of a rounded look to some of these other rocks in here. Maybe changing, not changing, but it's kind of turning the object, two-dimensional object in space by, let's see, okay, see right here, I just kind of darken in that background a little bit, you know, with the stylus tool like that. So now this rock stands out a little bit more, but, you know, on the design itself, you can see that background rock is darker than the foreground rock, so they keep transitioning into shade, light, okay? So I'm just reiterating that with a little bit more tone by putting in this area down here, this little shadow. Those rocks in the background stand out a little bit more, you know, through the use of contrast. Okay, so what this is doing is it's kind of anchoring the land figures down into the scene a little bit more. It's giving them some opacity. They're not just see-through, in other words. They have, you know, shadow and light on them. Kind of fleshing the scene out a little bit more. Okay, let's go back to this black. This black, I'm keeping in mind that I just re-inked it for, you know, to give me the strongest impressions. So, being careful, and by the way, I'm just using that same tip right there. Blot it off a little bit for a little bit more control, also to get a feel. I mean, essentially, when you ink up, you know, a piece of sponge like this, you're turning this into kind of a pad on a stick. So you want to be able to, you know, be aware of how much ink is on your pad. If there's a lot of ink and you just put a little dab down, it might create a really strong streak. So kind of just be aware of that. And, you know, in most cases, I don't want to have a really dark streak at this point in time. I kind of want to have control over it. Control over my application, and I typically have more control the drier it is on this. I don't want it, sometimes I don't want it so dry because it's just going to take me forever to apply, you know, some ink down to achieve the tone, the value that I'm going for. So just kind of get a feel for it, and you know, take this in a nice incremental, take a nice incremental approach to it. Okay, so see my rocks are starting to look a little bit more rounded. I've taken some tone and I've added it right in here. So now this rock looks like it's, you know, kind of rounded. You can see this one right here. You know, I haven't touched those areas yet, so not quite as rendered as these. That starts getting back into some small areas, so I can kind of, I'm just using this as little, you know, kind of almost like a little brush marker approach, but this is a soft tip, so it's applying it in a softer fashion. Okay. Let's see here if I get into here. It's kind of more of a, see, it's a very gray, you know, look, okay? And if I use lighter pressure, it's lighter. See how light I can get this? I mean, this is black ink, but I'm achieving various, you know, range of values right here, okay? And that's easier to control, you know, with that amount of ink than this amount of ink, right? Okay. let's tip the edges with this kind of gray. I mean, it's black that I'm using. I'm not using the physical gray tone. Okay, just kind of framing the scene a little bit more. Seems like it could be interesting to add a little bit of a pale color to that little bit of cloud or whatever it is. Let's try the number 67 bubblegum pink. Okay. I'm thinking to myself if I want that. Let's do this. Let's go with a little bit of bubblegum pink and add a bit of this pale orange. Sorry. Bubblegum pink and pale orange. Dabbed it in here first. Okay, and dabbing it into that one. Getting some kind of, mix of the two. Let's see here. If I can get a little of this color up there. I might have taken off too much, but like I always said, like I just said, it's kind of better to have control over it than kind of to get a big huge glob of something that you didn't really want. Okay, so see that color in there? Kind of changes the range of hue in a scene. Well, I shouldn't say that. It didn't change the hue, but extended the range of hue in kind of a subtle fashion. And by doing it, adding some other color in there, either warm or cool, it kind of reiterates the idea of this being a reflection of the sky, being that you have this kind of isolated two bits of color, kind of reflecting in each other. Like that, or whether the water's reflecting the sky. Okay, so I'll go into some more shadows in another video. I just wanted to kind of play around with some of these things and test them out. I don't know, I like it. I'll have to play around with it a little bit more. This is the Reed's Large stamp, one of my favorites for adding in foreground to a scene. You can see where I've stamped out, a large portion of them just off the page. You don't have to use the whole thing. I've changed the angle from impression to impression. Okay. And we had that texture that's been utilized with the kind of splash. And I don't really see that too much at this point in time. I think I've gone in and added a lot of colors on top. You can see it a little bit down here. I don't know, maybe some bleach or something like that would have been better. But, let's see. That being said, I put a few little highlights on tops of some of my rocks, capturing that light. This is a white gel pen, and the white gel pen looks good as a highlight when you've retained some of the white of the card, because you're saying that some of that, that light in there is, you're saying that little bit in there is, white light reflecting on clouds or fog or whatever that might be. So if you're going to do, it stands to reason that if it's that color of light, then this color of reflected light, you know, by way of a highlight means that it's reflecting that same color. So in other words, I wouldn't do everything in all, you know, all colored out, you know, in terms of the white of the card, and then add in the white highlight. I don't know, you can test it out or something like that, but sometimes it stands out too much. It's not, it doesn't blend in with the background as much if you don't keep a little bit of that white in there. Could just be a little bit too. Okay, I'm adding some of these highlights to some of these reeds here to make them stand out from the background a little bit more. I have it on some of my rocks, reflecting that light in the sky. And you can always do little highlights in the sky, in the form of stars, perhaps. Okay. So just a real simple background. You know, like I said, I wanted to test out some of these other dyes and kind of applying it, you know, in a kind of more painterly fashion. Kind of gives it a nice texture in the background, but a lot more experimentation to do with those dyes like that, and probably using it on some matte paper. So anyways, hope you enjoyed watching this video.